Hey guys, King of Homes, Stephen King, and if you watched our last video, you know that we have just noticed a small decrease in buyer activity over the last couple of weeks. So we're here to talk about what does that mean? Is this 2006, 2007 all over again? Stick around because we're going to dig into it. Okay, so last video we were talking about the differences between a seller's market, a buyer's market, and what a balanced market looks like. So that way you know the differences, and when there is a decrease in buyer activity, what does that mean? And how much of a decrease in buyer activity do you need to get to a balanced market and further into a buyer's market? So we were talking about how we noticed when you put a property up for sale, within the first week we were getting 40, 50, 80, 100 showings in the first week, which is absolutely unheard of. It is one of the hottest real estate markets in the last 100 years. However, in the last 3 weeks, we put up 5 listings, and we noticed that those properties, which were great, attractive, wonderful homes, were receiving 15, 20 buyers, which is as opposed to the 2 or 3 times that we were seeing weeks before. So what does that mean? Is the market dropping? Are we going to tank? Are things going down? Is this 2006, 2007 all over again? We got some talking points to go over so that way you understand the differences of then versus now, since you already understand what a balanced market looks like. So inventory then versus now is the first thing I want to talk about, because you guys already saw that supply and demand is essentially what drives the market. It all boils down into supply and demand and learning what supply and demand looks like in each market. So inventory and supply and demand in 2006, 2007 kind of looked like this. We had 116 million households in the United States of America around that time. And with that, we had about 3.7 million homes for sale. What does it look like today? Today we have 128 million households in America with 1 to 1.1 million homes for sale. So if we're talking supply and demand, there is a drastic difference between the housing bubble then versus what's going on right now. We have an increase in demand by 10%, and we have a fourth of the available inventory. So now you take your conclusions from that, but then you might say, Steve, well, what about foreclosures and delinquencies and all the forbearance that's going on due to COVID? Well, let's dig into that. Let's take a look at those numbers and the differences between then versus now and the forbearance and people who may have gotten behind on their mortgage due to COVID or losing their job and any hardships that may have happened from that. So it's important to know that the financial system in 2006, 2007 for qualifying for a home was a lot different than what it is today. So back then, you can have low qualifications and one owner could end up purchasing 3, 4, 5, 6 different properties despite them not even being able to really afford it. And what happened then is if one person who owned 5 homes went into foreclosure on one home, that could cause a cascade of a chain reaction, which then turns into 4 or 5 homes under foreclosure under that one owner, as opposed to now qualifications for buying a home are much tighter. you have to qualify. Not only that, but if you're looking to purchase multiple properties, now you need 20% at minimum. Most likely 25% with 6 months reserves if you want to purchase a second, third, or fourth property. So you have to be overqualified to purchase an additional property now versus then. Again, and anybody see the movie The Big Short? You know, you could work at McDonald's and own $1 million home, or a couple of them. So there's a big difference in qualifications from then versus now. Now also, foreclosures. From the housing bubble, almost 60% of people were behind and or upside down on their home, which means they owed the bank more than their house was worth. Today, only 2% are behind or upside down on their mortgage. 2% upside down on their home. So now I want to talk about differences of foreclosures then and what COVID caused, which was the new term is now forbearance. Foreclosures in 2007, 8, people were upside down on their homes, and when they no longer could make their payment, maybe because of a layoff or this or that, they had nowhere to go because they maybe owed the bank $500,000 and the house was only worth $400,000, which means they were negative $100,000 in equity, and they couldn't make their mortgage. So they couldn't list their home for sale, and so the bank had to foreclose on their home, and the banks went right into foreclosure. The bank just went right after that asset at that time. And there, of course, were not enough buyers to purchase at that given moment all of the foreclosures that were coming onto the market. So you had a lot of homes that were sitting vacant, empty, zombie homes for years, some homes up to a decade because of what happened there. Versus today, what happened with COVID is people went into forbearance or they paused their mortgage. The banks, it was like the great big freeze. Now, at the start of COVID, a lot of people got worried. They said, holy crap, babe, I don't know if I'm going to lose my job. I don't know if we're going to have money coming in next month. I don't know what's going to happen. The banks paused without punishments, or they gave you a loan modification in a couple of different ways. Let's say they tacked that 3 months of paused payments onto the back half of your loan. So that way, instead of you paying your home off in 30 years, now it may take you 31 years to pay off your home. Or they tacked it back to where when you sold the home, you would then pay back those 3 months that you missed. Or even some banks allowed their clients, their homeowners, to adjust or modify their loan into 40-year mortgages. So these people ended up getting caught up on their payments, not necessarily falling behind because of the way the banks were restructuring and modifying the circumstances. Not only that, but there's a huge difference versus the forbearances of today and the foreclosures of then. Today, most homeowners, because of the rise of the market, have equity in their homes. There is majority of people who, let's say you owed and you really did fall behind on your mortgage and you could not keep up. Most people today own $300,000 on their home, and their home, because of the increase in price, is worth $400,000. So that $12,000 in mortgage payments that you lost and you can't catch up on, you could list your house for sale and walk away with a profit. Whereas back then, when you were upside down, you couldn't sell your home. You had to short sale or foreclose. So that's a huge thing. Now, some people may say, oh, well, Steve, what about the moratorium and the eviction crisis that happened because of COVID, and that you could no longer evict your tenant who wasn't paying you for an entire year. So those people lost out on $30,000, $40,000 in income. Again, guys, over the last year, people's equity have gone up by almost 20, 30%. So that $25,000 or $30,000 loss in revenue, again, their homes went up in value more than they lost in rental income. So those people can still sell their home and make a profit. So there are very, very few people who are upside down, really genuinely upside down on their mortgage right now. And let's say they refinanced to the max right before COVID happened. Again, you're still not upside down. Now, there are a percentage of the population who really did lose their job, who really do not know where their next paycheck is coming from. And they really are upside down on their house because maybe they borrowed too much and they're in an area where the supply and demand isn't necessarily catching up. If you took 100% of that segment of the population and you took all of their homes and threw them onto the market right now, it would be like dropping a grain of sand onto the beach. There is not enough inventory that is upside down right now to flood the market to turn the supply and demand on its head. So, in conclusion, delinquencies and foreclosures then versus now are a lot different. And again, the percentage of people who, I've heard some people say, oh, well, there's going to be, from these moratoriums, a ton of properties coming to the market. Take all of those properties, throw them on the market. It's like throwing a bucket of water on an entire massive building on fire. It does nothing. There's just not enough of that to shift the amount of supply and demand in the market. Now, another thing I want to cover are the interest rates and the affordability. Because this right here today is different. It's a big factor that is different from 2006, 2007, 2008 that they were not dealing with then. What we are dealing with, well, before I get to that, it's important to know that interest rates back then were around 6.5%, whereas now interest rates are around 3 to 3.5%. So what does that do to somebody's mortgage? Let's say you're a buyer and right now you qualify for a $450,000 mortgage with a 3.5% interest rate. If those interest rates were to go up 1 point to 4.5%, that same exact buyer now for the same exact monthly payment only qualifies for $400,000 in home. They have lost $50,000 in purchasing power from their interest rate going from 3.5% to 4.5%. Because again, banks qualify you based on how much of a mortgage payment you can afford, and then they reverse engineer that to determine how much you can spend. So somebody who qualifies for a $3,000 a month mortgage, if the interest rates go up and down, doesn't matter. That same person still qualifies for $3,000 a month in mortgage. The only difference is $3,000 a month in mortgage purchases them less home. So interest rates going up could absolutely 110% affect our market. Now, here are some things to look at and stay on top of. Inflation. This is something we are dealing with right now that they were not dealing with back then. Inflation results could cause the Fed to raise rates to artificially slow the market. What the hell does that mean? Right now, one of the Fed's biggest concerns is inflation. And the fourth quarter of this year, the first quarter of next year, and the second quarter of next year are going to tell the Fed a lot about whether or not inflation is getting much higher than they anticipated or if it's leaning towards getting out of control. In the event that inflation does end up being much higher than the Fed wants it to be, there are talks that the Fed may have to artificially slow down the market by increasing interest rates. So what would that do? If interest rates went up, let's say the Fed says inflation's getting way too high, we're going to have to increase interest rates. What's going to happen there is it's going to shrink buyer pools. So buyer pools would have to shrink by a factor of 5. If you were watching our last video, you know a balanced market usually gets 1 or 2 showings in a week, whereas what we're seeing today is 15 to 20 showings in a week, which what we were seeing 2-3 months ago was 50, 60, 100 showings in a week. So from our last video, to tie it all together, guys, we're in the middle of the summer. Yes, I noticed a decrease in buyer activity. What could that be from? Interest rates have not gone up enough at all to really impact the market. I think we're seeing a little bit of buyer fatigue. People have been losing their minds, going crazy for over a year and a half on purchasing real estate. I think we're in the middle of the summer where plenty of people are on vacation and they've taken a step and a break from purchasing homes. And I think that over the last year and a half, plenty of buyers who were having difficulty, they either found homes or they found temporary living arrangements, so that way the pressure on them hasn't been as large to find a home. I think when you factor in buyer fatigue, it's the middle of the vacation season up here on the Northeast. I think even though the buyer pool has dropped a little bit, it hasn't dropped anywhere near enough to swing the momentum from the seller's favor towards a balanced market, and of course nowhere near enough to even get close to a buyer's market. Add that along with the fact that we are, if you look at all this stuff, we're in a much different position today than we were back then. And in my personal opinion, I think prices have kind of reached the point where buyers are like, you know what? Actually, I don't think that home is worth the $50,000, $60,000 over asking price. And that's not going to bring prices down. I think it may prevent prices from ticking up and increasing at the rate that they have been increasing over the past year or two. Now, again, the buyer pool would have to shrink by a factor of 5 just to bring us to a balanced market. And we are nowhere near there at this moment. We are still in the largest buying pool, the largest first-time buying pool ever in history. And we are definitely still in a seller's market. Now, how should you navigate this if you're a buyer, and how should you navigate this if you're a seller? Now, let's just say that this drop in buyer activity that I've noticed here on the Northeast on Long Island over the past 3 weeks happens to stay the same. If you are a seller, what this means is you're going to have to pay a little bit closer attention to what you price your home at. If you can't just throw crap at a wall and hope it sticks. You have to price your property properly. You have to listen to your local expert, the guy or woman in that area who knows it better than anybody else. You have to take their advice. You have to list your property appropriately. And if you do that, you are still going to sell over asking price. You are still going to have multiple offers. Maybe you won't have 25, but you will certainly have multiple offers that drive your for sale price higher. Buyers, what does this mean for you guys? Buyers, I don't want you sitting on the sidelines saying, I'm going to try to time the market, because nobody on this planet right now knows where the market's going to be in 6 months from now or 2 years from now. You have billionaires who argue back and forth every day about which way it's going to go. Nobody knows. What I want you guys to pay attention to are interest rates, and I want you to be purchasing the types of homes that you're not going to have to sell in 5 years. God forbid Stephen King is completely wrong and the market does tank. If you're purchasing a 25 or 30-year home, it's not going to matter, because if the market were to come down and crash and burn, you're not selling your home anyway. So if you're purchasing the house that can last you the longest amount of time, in 25, 30 years, that house is going to be paid off or close to it, and still worth at most likely double what you paid for it today, regardless if there's a massive crash and burn over the next 1 or 5 years. Purchase the home that can last you the longest amount of time. The same way Warren Buffett says with stocks, the best stock to buy is the stock you never have to sell. That's the same exact way it works in real estate. The best home to buy is the home you never have to sell, because you become bulletproof in the event the market does this. It doesn't affect you because you're not selling anyway. So guys, I hope that helps. I'm extremely optimistic about our real estate market despite a drop in buyer activity. I think the drop in buyer activity is a little bit of buyer fatigue and the timing of the summer. To my sellers, make sure you listen to your expert. Make sure you take the pro's advice. Sit down with them as soon as you can. Let them, I don't care if you're thinking about selling in 6 months or a year. You need to be getting together with your expert right now, so that way they can take your intentions and help you plan accordingly. So guys, like, comment, follow, subscribe. I appreciate you spending your time with me. I hope this was informative for you as a buyer, a seller, or maybe an agent just starting out in the business. We appreciate you.